Good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's session, webinar session on brain-based strategies for today's schools. My name is Honor Feedy, and I'm going to be your moderator today for this exciting webinar we've arranged for understanding why incorporating brain-based strategies into elementary classrooms is so urgently important. I'm very excited to introduce Roger Stark and Betsy Hill, who have a lot of great information to impart to you on this subject. And I hope this session will go really nicely and you can ask questions. What we have done with this session is we are recording it, so if you aren't able to come in right away, you'll be able to download it later within 72 hours. We've also arranged to have the PowerPoint presentation available to you. It is ready right now for you to download on our website at www.naesp.org. And the way we'll handle questions today is we will be using, all of your lines are muted. What we'll do is when you have a question, please feel free to use the question box on your panel. It's located over to the right. If you'll open that up, and as you have questions, please feel free to write it in, and we'll be breaking at different parts within the program, and you can answer that. We'll also have time at the end for a good discussion. So with that, I'd like to introduce Roger Stark. He is the founder and CEO of Learning Enhancement Corporation. He's the creator of Brainware Safari, Cognitive Skills, and he has a lot to impart with that. Betsy Hill is an experienced educator and business leader who serves as President and Chief Operating Officer of Learning Enhancement Corporation, and she's the developer of Brainware Safari. So what we're going to do today is, Roger, I will turn it over to you to begin.
Well, good afternoon. I want to thank everyone for taking this opportunity to join us, and I do want to apologize if anyone hears any background noise because I'm sitting at the airport. We just came off of having a congressional hearing on a joint session of Congress on neuroscience in the classroom. So it's quite an exciting, filled, over-capacity room. This is a great time for us to take this journey today. We believe there's a confluence of 4 issues that are coming to place together right now at this one time. Next. The first issue is there's no more money. The state governments, the federal government, we've gone through them time and again over the last, I can't remember when we haven't, every time there's been an education issue or a challenge, and there is no more money. One of the great things about a properly structured program of this nature that we're talking about, classroom strategies for building very compatible lesson plans and cognitive development tools, we've been able to cut special education budgets by as much as 50%. That's a big deal when you're talking about no more money, because that's one of our more expensive populations that we have to serve today. Next. The next issue we want to talk about is accountability. As we begin to look at accountability, we've seen school districts go from being non-recognized academic performing districts in their state to reaching as much as the 7th highest performing school districts within their respective states. We consider that real accountability. The next big issue that's coming together is a heightened focus on teacher proficiency. And we constantly are hearing people say, well, if the student doesn't perform, obviously the teacher's not working hard enough. Obviously the teacher perhaps is not competent. The teacher's not doing what they're supposed to do. But in reality, it's more about a lack of capacity amongst our students. Not every student comes to school from a highly proactive, stimulating, engaged home environment ready for good teaching and good curriculum. And as their capacity is lacking, that's a lack of preparation. And I'd like to ask, as you think about what takes place in the classroom today, what would that classroom look like? What would teacher proficiency look like if you delivered a classroom full of students better prepared to learn? What I've often found, and everything that I've encountered and everything I've been able to study, life, if you want to do something well, it's about preparation. And once again, a properly structured initiative of this nature, the field of neuroscience and cognitive development, proper tools, that's exactly what you can do. You can develop a classroom that's better prepared to learn, prepared for good teaching, and prepared for good curriculum. And then lastly, Common Core standards. there's an enormous effort coming down the pike about Common Core, and we believe the Common, that's next please, we believe the Common Core does a lot of good things. It's really about performing and helping students perform outside of school. So much effort and energy focused on this whole thing of Common Core. Corporations tell us each and every day, all the time, we're not getting students that have the ability to think and to reason and to problem solve. And that's exactly what Common Core is focused on. It's developing thinkers and problem solvers. And a properly structured program working with neuroscience classroom will empower you to be able to build thinkers and problem solvers. So not only can they perform well in school, but they can perform well outside of school. And then lastly, when you start to look at Common Core, we believe it can go a long way in helping the acceleration and the ease of implementation within your present school system. Next. So this is not me talking. What I have to say about cognitive development or neuroscience is really not important. Perhaps some of you are familiar with the Office of Economic Development and Cooperation. Like the public report about every 15 years and looking at what is really going on in our economy. And one of the issues they address is the PISA scores. I'm sure all of you know what PISA scores are. And they clearly state in their report, I can share that report for those who would like to have it after, that if we can raise our students, each one of our students, to the mean level of the PISA score, I hope you're all sitting down, that we can uncover $72 trillion worth of GDP. Now, as you know, the entire world's GDP is only about 65 trillion. The United States is only 16 trillion. So if we can figure out, and you are on the front lines of making this happen, but you need the how. All education reform talks about the what, but you need the how. And they say that this is what we can uncover if we can raise those scores to the mean level. And what's interesting about what they say we can do, they say the number one obstacle, the number one challenge of making that happen is the lack of cognitive development in our student population. They lay the challenge directly at the feet of cognitive development, which we're going to talk a little bit more about today. If we do this well, all of our other issues go away. Next. Not only, next please. Not only does the Office of Economic Development and Cooperation talk about discipline, but I know many of you are familiar with NK, the accrediting body that universities with facilities. They recently came out with their policy review, and it's called The Road Less Traveled. And they clearly state in their policy review that if educators do not begin to incorporate developmental sciences in the classroom, we will never close the achievement. Once again, it's about the lack of preparation for past student population. I don't know what each state that's online today. We were just looking at the state of Illinois, for example. Less than a third of our children are proficient at fourth grade with fourth grade work. Less than 12% of our African Americans are proficient in fourth grade work. And less than 18% of our students. This is a disaster traveling on. This is unsustainable. They talk about the budget. This is unsustainable. The baby boomers are 75 million left. The next generation is 35 million. There's no way this can continue. So they talk about clearly the lack of, they talk about the developmental sciences, which cognitive is one. There's others. There's EQ and many others, but cognitive is part of the developmental science. And they go further into that report and they talk about reluctantly and why educators have been reluctant to adopt this strategy within the classroom. And then they go on further and they talk about and make recommendations what needs to be done going forward. And both of these reports we can make available for you. So it's not us talking about the value of neuroscience in the classroom and cognitive development tools, proper structure, cognitive development programs. And I might have to need to be very cautious, very skeptical, and make sure whatever you're doing, it's peer-reviewed published research that you're operating with. Next. Next. Okay. We hear a lot today about the 21st century learning initiatives. A lot of educators I know will say, well, that's Jesus project. pig with a different color lipstick. It may well be, and I've talked about this a number of times. It's a beautiful piece, but there's one big thing that's missing in all of this. We talk about better schools. We talk about the need for more technology. We talk about the needs for elevating teacher proficiency. We talk about the need for different curriculum. But the reality is there's been a missing point in all reform initiatives that we've been exposed to, and that's the value of the student. For us, for students, it's the absolute most critical single point within the 21st schools. So what we would suggest, if anything that you look at, the greatest difference in success is 8 inches. That's what lies between the ears. And so as we talk about the student and what we can do about best practices in building brain compatible lesson plans and cognitive development tools, I'd like to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Stephanie Hillman.
Thank you, Roger. Hopefully my connection is a little bit better than Roger's. I know it was difficult to understand some of what he was saying. And what he's talked about so far is really sort of why it is so important to incorporate cognitive sciences and an understanding of the brain into our classroom activities. And in fact, this picture always reminds me that every classroom is really about a set of unique individuals, students as well as the teacher, with each having an individual brain. And what we understand now about how the brain learns and functions has a lot to tell us about the most effective approaches to teaching and learning. Next. So this image of the brain getting wired by an electrician is sort of a fanciful way of making that our point is that our brains do function through connections among the hundreds of billions of cells that are in our brain. So what you're seeing here is that, I don't know whether you, if we counted them, we might come up with maybe a couple of dozen connections, but our real brains actually contain trillions and trillions of connections. And those connections are all developed among the neurons, the cells in our brains, as a result of the experiences that we have. Next. So in fact, our brains are learning machines, essentially, and each of them builds itself through our experiences to strengthen the connections that are the most useful and the most used. So what learning is, from a biological basis, is the act of making and strengthening connections between the neurons in our brain. And those happen as a result of our experiences. And when we're trying to remember something, what we're doing is we're actually reactivating those connections that we've previously made. And if we don't have strong networks to begin with, they're going to be awful hard to reactivate, and then we don't remember things. And so this is the process that's happening. The neuroscientists like to say that neurons that fire together wire together, so that the more that neurons are activated, the more likely they are to activate again in that particular combination of something that we've learned. Okay, so next, I think we're not ready for the next one. So what we wanted to do today, as well as give you some of sort of that background, is to talk about and focus on some really important principles of how the brain works and how the brain learns based on neuroscience research, and what some of the implications are for instructional strategies. So what I'm going to try to do is give you some really practical applications of these things, as well as talking about the principles themselves, because those are can be used to develop a lot of other kinds of strategies. So the three basic principles that we're going to focus on this afternoon are the fact that the brain seeks meaningful patterns. It's basically a pattern recognition device. The role of emotions, which can either impede or support the learning process. And then the implications of the fact that we know that there are two very different types of long-term memory, and our strategies to help our students learn based on the type of learning that it is need to be quite different. Next. So the first principle, which is the brain seeks meaningful patterns, we don't take in a lot of meaningless information. That's not a good survival strategy. And whenever we encounter something new, what we have to do is our brains try to fit it into, they try to match it up with information that we have in our existing network of neurons. And if it can't find a connection, it just ignores that information. So what I want to do now, and we'll start to do that on the next slide, is to give you an example of this. So what you see here is a bunch of black and white markings on the slide. And if you see something, this is when we get engaged and we ask you to participate. So what I'd like you to do is to type into your chat window what you see if you see something. If you don't, that's okay, but a lot of people will see something in this picture, and so we're going to give you just a minute to type something in, and then Honor is going to share with me what you've come up with. Honor, are you getting
I'm not getting any so far. Feel free to use your question box too to type in what you see.
Typically, the kinds of things that I hear at this point are that people see, some people see a cat, some people see a dog.
Okay, I've got some for you.
Clown. Okay, good.
One person says a dog drinking water. Another person says a dog. Another person says a dog drinking water. Another person says a Dalmatian. Let's see, that is all I see so far.
Okay, well, some of you perhaps didn't see it, but if we go to the next slide, we'll highlight part of the image. And in fact, it was developed from a picture of a Dalmatian. It seems to be, oh, we got to go back to that previous one. Oops. There we go. And so if we think about the fact that when we try to think about what presenting new information to our students, we have to attach it to things that they already recognize. So if you didn't have any experience of a dog, no, you're certainly not going to see a dog's shape in that pattern of spots and splotches. But if you do, then you start to detect it, and your brain automatically organizes as it did for everybody who said that they saw a dog. They were seeing this particular organization of that information. So we can go to the next slide. So if we want our students to understand, if we really want to make something meaningful to them, we really have about two primary options. One is to find the experience that they've had and hook the new information to it. And the other alternative is to create the experience with them. Because if there has to be a neural network that this hooks into, and if there isn't one, we have to basically build it from other kinds of things and from a direct experience. So we can go to, what we're going to do is now look at some examples of each of these approaches. And we can go to the next, okay, this is good. So when we hook information into existing information, a great way to do this is Mindmaps. I imagine that a lot of the participants today use Mindmaps or have certainly seen them used in a whole variety of ways. And these are really a good way for students to connect information that they already know to new information. They've become very popular in the last several years, and for very good reasons, because they help students build and connect their own neural networks around a particular subject. This is an example of a mind map that starts with the stages of human life from baby to adult, and then shows the stages of development of other animals, including frogs and ladybugs and chickens. And the important thing about a mind map is that the students develop them themselves. So there's nothing inherently right or wrong about a mind map that a student might develop, because remember, it's really about letting them connect and reinforce the information the way that their minds organize it and the way that they can see it and best understand it. So there's really no purpose in you creating, a teacher creating a mind. If you're creating the mind map, then your mind is the one that's really learning and focusing on that. And you're the one whose synapses are strengthening, which are the connections among the neurons. So great activity for students to help connect information into something that they already know. The next slide will talk a little bit about a way of approaching maybe a concept that students really aren't familiar with. And here what we're going to use as an example is the concept of ratios. There are lots and lots, of course, of different ways of creating experiences with students. Field trips, acting things out, any kinds of hands-on experience are all examples of creating an experience with your students. And so what we have here is a hands-on experience to help students understand ratios. I imagine that most of you have had the experience of mixing frozen orange juice concentrate, and the ratio of cans of water to cans of frozen concentrate is 3:1. So this, when you do this activity and you mix it in the classroom, of course, the result is very tasty and reinforces the whole idea that the ratios are useful also just in everyday life. So it's not just an abstract concept, it's something that we really use and that is important to use. And then depending on the age of the students, and Anna, if you could just click forward again because we get a few questions at the bottom. We could also then sort of either think about or actually try and do the experiment with some different ratios. So you might ask your students, for example, what happens when we change the ratio to 1:1? Well, of course, that's going to be less water than is prescribed in the recipe, and the product will probably taste awfully intense and sweet. What happens if we change the ratio to 5:1? And the students might speculate on that, and they might try it, and they might get a real physical way of remembering that information. And then, as I started to think about this, I thought about doing it a more advanced step, maybe with junior high, high school students, where you might ask them to think about, okay, what if you took the orange juice that was mixed on a 1:1 ratio and the orange juice that was mixed with a 5:1 ratio and combined them together? So what I thought we would do is we might practice that ourselves and challenge ourselves to think about this. And I promise you will remember ratios as an opportunity to, or orange juice as an opportunity to discuss ratios by doing this. So, Honor, do you want to bring up the poll? Oops, no, we want to go.
Sorry, okay, I'm about to bring up the first poll, and that is, okay, it did not bring it up. I am sorry, Betsy, but it doesn't look like it's working right.
Okay, well, we'll just do this the way we did the other one. And your possible answers, I'm going to give you 3 answers. One is if you mix the results of the 1:1 and the 5:1 ratio concoctions, will that taste sweeter than you want, or weaker than you want, or just about right? So those are your three options.
And again,
so
if you
would
would
type that into the chat window in your Q&A.
Yeah, use the question box if you would so that we can record that.
I bet the audience didn't know they were going to have to work so hard.
I know. Betsy, could you go over those choices one more time for folks?
Sure. So we're going to mix the 1-to-1 ratio and the 5-to-1 ratio, and we're going to put that in a nice big pitcher, and we're going to pour some out, and it's either going to taste too intense and too sweet, or it might taste too weak, or it's going to be just about right. It's sort of like the Three Little Bears options.
Okay, we got 3 just about rights.
Okay, well, those are people who are really on the ball and paying attention. And it's really just very simple to think about this. If you have 1-to-1, you've got 1 glass of or can of water and 1 can of orange juice concentrate. And then we add to that 5 cans of water and 1 can of orange juice concentrate, which means that we're now 6-to-2. And of course, we can simplify 6-to-2 as a ratio down to 3-to-1. That's really just 2 pitchers of orange juice together. So those of you who got it right, congratulations. And for those of you who didn't want to try it, I recommend getting some of that frozen orange juice concentrate out of your freezer and going at it. Okay, we can go on to the next one. So we've been talking about these, right? I'm not seeing the new slide, but I'm sure it's coming up. Perfect. All of these as ways of hooking into existing information and helping our students recognize and identify patterns. And the ability to see patterns is one of those things that we observe as not necessarily always being as strong in all students. Some students just have had more practice than others. So helping them practice seeing patterns can be a very helpful really at any stage and in any academic context. And there are lots and lots of resources out there that you can use to find patterns for any age. So what you're seeing here are some pretty simple patterns that would be appropriate to appropriate for students to be looking at and discussing and trying to puzzle out at the early elementary stage. And so the first pattern you see is just alternating blue and red and blue and red and blue and red. And so the prediction that your student should give you for the next one in the the next 1 or 2 in the order of the sequence would be another blue and another red. Then the second one is a little bit harder, of course, and we have 1 blue, 1 red, 1 blue and 2 reds, and then we go back to 1 blue and 1 red. And so this might take a student a little bit longer to figure out, and they might experiment. You could have them do it with blocks or something tactile in your, or that you might have them draw it. Lots of different options here. And then the third one, we have 1 blue in between a growing sequence of red circles. So there's the first one is a single circle, and then we have 2 red circles, and then we have 3. And so we would predict that after following that final blue circle on the bottom row, we would have 4 reds. Now, what I'm going to show you on the next one, and this is going to give you another chance to exercise those neurons that you have on your brains, is an example for an older age group. And this can be really anywhere from probably late elementary up through adults. Many adults can find this challenging as well to think of. And so we have a sequence here. The first 3 images are followed by a question mark, which would be filled in by either number 1 at the bottom, number 2 at the bottom, number 3 at the bottom, or number 4 at the bottom. And again, we'll give you a chance to put your answer into the chat or into the Q&A, I think you want it, and determine whether you think that number 1 best completes the series, or number 2, or number 3, or number 4.
Betsy, I'm going to try to launch this poll. I think I can actually get this one to work. So for everyone, just hold on a moment. I'm going to try to launch this. All right. You should see a poll in progress, and what you want to do is just check 1, 2, 3, or 4. Which picture best completes the sequence? And we'll give you just a moment to finish up. Yeah, we're getting lots of good responses here.
Good. Well, hopefully they can still see it.
Yeah. Okay, I'm about to close it, so get your responses in. All right, we have closed it. And it looks like I'm going to share it right now. Okay, so you can see, can you see the response?
I can. So the predominant response was number 1, which is correct. And I will also tell you that those of you who chose number 3, that is the second best answer. And this is actually from a book of Build Your Business Brain by Donna Lee Marcus. And if anybody's interested in more information on that, they can simply email me. But this is a wonderful way of trying to think about patterns, especially when you have multiple things going on and we want our brains to be operating a little bit more complex level. So great job, everybody. And we can move on now and start talking about principle 2. So we've talked about our brains and making meaningful information, helping them see patterns. What we're going to do now, I think we need to go back one slide where it says principle 2. Right, great. And so we're going to talk a little bit about emotions. And what we know now today is that emotions play a much greater role in the learning process than I think any of us ever appreciated. And it's a two-edged sword. So there are ways that they can impede learning and there are ways that they can enhance learning. So from the impeding standpoint, most of you are familiar with the fight or flight response and what happens when you're stressed. And it's not just about getting mugged in a dark alley. It's really lots of encounters, and especially learning encounters or social encounters in a school situation can have that kind of emotional import for some of our students. And what happens when we're under stress is that basically the thinking part of our brain, the frontal lobes of our brain where all of our thinking and decision making and rational thought happen, are shut down. This is so that, basically your body would just react and your survival instinct kicks in. But of course, if you're under stress, for example, if you're sitting down to take a state test and you find that a stressful experience, as many, many students do, it's not going to help. And believing that the test is important is going to make it even more stressful. So what happens then is the brain just pretty much shuts down, and it's very, very difficult to think and to respond and to deal with academic kinds of activities. So we know that our classrooms have to be physically safe, but we also have to make them psychologically safe. And if we go to the next slide, we can talk about a couple of approaches that we can use to help mitigate stress. So one example is, many students sit in the room, and the teacher asks a question and their heads go down and they try to hide their eyes because they don't want to get called on. And of course you want everybody to participate and everybody to be using their brains and thinking and trying to understand the kind of response that you want. Another way to do that is to have students basically combine into groups. And one technique that we use a lot in our professional development as well as in other kinds of training things that we do is called think, pair, share. What you do is you ask each student to write down what they think the best answer to your question is. And then they share it in 2, and then they share it once the 2 people, or you could do it in 3 or 4 if you wanted to. And once the little group has sort of a consensus of what they think the best answer is, then the group will share it. So no individual student is bearing the burden of, did I get it right or did I get it wrong? And you still get everybody thinking about it. Another opportunity, if you have them, are using clickers. If you want to get just some quick feedback on whether students are understanding something without singling anyone out. This allows you to, of course, ask a question, get responses, just like we're doing in the poll here. I can't see who was right and who was wrong, but that gives me a sense of whether people are following and whether they're getting what we're talking about. And the third thing I want to talk about, and this is some fairly new research within the last couple of years that I think is really powerful. The research, and this was conducted, a lot of it at the University of Chicago, is that when students are asked to sit down before they are taking a test and to write about their feelings for 5 or 10 minutes before taking a test, it actually significantly increases performance on the test. And what's happening here is that all of that internal talk that is going on in our minds when we're really stressed about something, will I do well, will I know the answers, oh my gosh, I think I've forgotten something already. So our minds, when we're stressed and when we're really dreading this kind of experience, are going through all kinds of things. If we can get it out onto paper, what happens is that it's no longer taking up all of our working memory. It's on paper, I've sort of done with it, I've moved on, and that allows the mind to focus and to be much more comprehensive about the information that I'm able to take in. I'm not going to lose so many details. I'm really going to do a much better job of addressing the requirements of the test. So that's a great way to help your students. Okay, so on the other side, of course, we said that emotions can help memory and help develop learning. And they, if done right, they can really add extra vividness. So adrenaline isn't just a stress response. That's really the stress aspect of it is to what degree. And we can use getting people, excited and motivated to enhance positive memories. And those engaging a little bit of adrenaline actually gets those memories to be stronger. The record of them and their ability to reactivate it is just that much stronger. So on the next slide, we will, I'm going to give you a few suggestions of ways that people have found to develop those really good and positive emotions. The first one is called something good and new. And something good and new refers to an exercise or an activity that many teachers do where they have, when students come into their class for the first time that day, they will ask every student to talk about something good and new. Now, students are sometimes a little reluctant to do this at first, and you might get some sort of answers that are not real enthusiastic, like, well, my cat didn't die last night. But eventually everybody does get into it, and they start focusing them on positive things, and that sets the stage for good learning. The tell me a joke scenario goes like this. You've had a bad morning, the coffee pot burned the coffee, and you had an argument with your spouse, and you got a flat tire on the way to school. So things are a little bit tough, and you know that your little student, Teddy, is going to be just a pistol because he always is on days when you just don't feel like it. And he's just always going to do something that's going to trigger one of your hot buttons. Well, the teacher experienced that one day, and sure enough, Teddy was acting out. And she felt that stress response, but instead of yelling at Teddy or making him sit down or whatever, she said, Teddy, tell me a joke. And so Teddy thought this was a little odd, but he did, and it probably wasn't a very good joke, but she laughed. And what the students learned as a result of this is that, and she explained to them, she said, I was having a really hard day. And so I thought that if you told me a joke, I would laugh and we would all be in a better state of mind for learning. And so what the students did over the course of the year, when someone was having a bad time or a hard time or something happened that they didn't, was difficult for them, they would stop and say, tell me a joke. And it became sort of the class mantra, if you will, or a way that students generally dealt with some of those difficult times and created some much more positive emotions. Positive emotions are also generated by making things real for students, really helping them apply what you're doing in their own lives, role-playing, hands-on, multimedia games, all those kinds of things can generate really positive emotions and therefore much stronger memories of the information. And then finally, making yourself real. Trust is a huge thing, and I know that you all have experiences and relationships with your students that are really based on a strong understanding and a lot of trust, and that goes a long way to creating powerful emotions and positive emotions. Okay, so we can move on now. I'm going to go back now or get to Principle 3, which are there are two distinct types of long-term memory. And the two kinds of long-term memory, one is called declarative, sometimes also called semantic memory. And it's our general knowledge and our life experiences that we can actually declare or recall consciously, something I can tell somebody else. So examples of this are who was the first president of the United States, when was my mother's birthday, how many articles in the Constitution, those kinds of things are all factual information. The other kind of memory is called procedural memory. And this refers to things that are skills or habits that we practice to the point where they are automatic and unconscious. So if you think about the fact that you learn to walk as a baby and you do that all the time and you don't even think about it, or driving a car, riding a bike, tying your shoelaces, playing the piano if you play another instrument if you play, those kinds of things that you practice over and over again, eventually the brain says, oh, I can do this. You don't even have to think about it consciously. We can go to the next slide and talk about the fact that it's really important to understand these two different types of memory, because the strategies to learn in each of these two situations are completely different. So for declarative memory, that is for the kinds of factual information and content information, elaborative rehearsal is the best approach. So it's not repetition, it's not just over and over again. And there's a whole bunch of examples you can see here of ways that you can do that, where kids are actually actively manipulating the information, engaged in it, and doing things with it. On the other hand, when you have something that has to be encoded into procedural memory, you need a lot of repetition. And you need to do something over and over again, because that's what helps the brain take over and basically go into autopilot. So what you're going to see on the next couple of slides are some examples of peer teaching, which is a wonderful elaborative strategy. And you can do this with kids. We can go to the next slide, of really just about any age. And you're seeing some examples here of students explaining to their classmates what's going on. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see an example, which is one of my very favorites, of the fact that you can do this as young as with 4-year-olds. So we're having 4-year-olds here explain to each other how to count. And those look like little cherry tomatoes or something like that. Maybe they're apples for the tree. But these are, having the students actually then teach each other. And one of the things you can do is when you pair them up, you can walk around the room and listen to each of them. And if you hear the right kinds of things, you'll get feedback on how good the learning is and how well the students are doing. So that's a great example of how we work with information that has to be encoded in declarative memory. And I want to talk now a little bit about some of the kinds of skills that need to operate at a procedural level. And I gave some examples before, but here are some additional ones. And Honor, if you could click again 4 times, we're going to bring up some more information about some of the skills. This is a model of mental processing that we use to think about all the kinds of cognitive skills and cognitive processes that are involved in taking in and processing, learning, and recalling information. So, for example, our ability to sustain or to divide our attention, our ability to do visual and auditory discrimination, or how much information we can take at any glance. And then if you click, and you can click another couple of times, that's great. Perfect. And other skills like being able to keep things in a sequence. Remember, we talked about patterns and being able to keep things in a sequence. Our memory skills, so the ability to store things in short-term or in working memory, that is the ability to manipulate information while we're actively thinking about it, and how much information we can hold there, which is really key to reading comprehension, to math comprehension, to problem solving, all those kinds of things. And then logic, reasoning, planning, strategy. So these are processes and mental processes that we don't always think about teaching explicitly because they're the kinds of skills that actually have to be practiced and repeated over and over again. And one of the things that we have started to think about is how you can really understand what's happening in the new Common Core standards by looking at some of these kinds of mental processes that are things that we want students to be able to do with the content information that they're being exposed to. So if we go to the next slide, we will at some point see. Okay, so if you could just put the first one up, that'd be great. So if you think about our ability to just receive information and to start to encode it in memory, and what I'm doing now is really sort of building up the levels of higher order thinking that are so important and are so integral to the whole way that the Common Core standards are structured. Although basically sort of an adapted form of Bloom's taxonomy. So at the basic level, we want students to be able to know some things. Well, being able to know requires ability to attend, requires ability to take in information, discriminate, identify it, and then start to encode it in memory so that it can be retrieved later. And if we do the next click, we can add on to, we can build on knowing by comprehending. This is where we start to give things really information. It's not just knowing something, but it's building those neural networks and being able to relate them, knowing where things are in a sequence, knowing where things are in time and place relative to each other, and really being able to relate things and think things out in terms of a problem that we're working on in working memory. And then at the next step, we want to be able to analyze. We start to think about things logically. We start to take account of things in strategy and planning so that we can draw some conclusions. We want to relate things to each other. And so this becomes another higher order. And then ultimately, the goal of the Common Core standards and much of what happens in them, and we can click one more time, is about then applying them, which allows us, requires actually, not just allows us, requires that we do all of these things together, where we have all of these integrated functions and processes working in our brains. So what I'd like to do now is, because many of you may be thinking at this point that some of those skills are maybe not things that some of your students have in abundance, and that you can see that they might be stronger students and be able to move up in the hierarchies of what's going to be required in Common Core more readily if they could develop them. And what I want to share with you now, we can go to the next slide, is just a little bit of information about Brainware Safari, which is a software program that's specifically designed to develop these cognitive skills that we've been talking about. And they're the cognitive skills that are really critical for learning. It's grounded in neuroscience. It comes from clinical therapy best practices with a whole bunch of different disciplines, from speech pathology to vision developmental science to all psychology and a whole range of different disciplines. And it's implemented can be implemented over a semester basically. So it's the kind of thing that you can really do as an intervention or as a special program or as just part of the regular curriculum in a way that's really easy to implement. It develops 141 different cognitive skills, and in those areas we've been talking about attention, visual processing, auditory processing, memory, and the others. And I just briefly want to share with you on the next slide just a little bit of research data. This is an example from original peer-reviewed published research that, let's see, the charts come up. There they go. And what you're going to see here is some cognitive, the results of this cognitive training on both basic cognitive skills as well as academic. Because remember, these are primary processes that the brain uses that are applied in everything that we do. And what we've seen, and this is very typical, we've seen this over and over again in a whole series of different research programs and in our field studies with schools, is over 4 years of cognitive growth for students on average over the 12 weeks of using the program, compared to just 4 months of growth for a control group. And on the academic side, almost 2 years of growth, a year and 11 months, compared to a month for the control group, and that was on reading, tests of reading and math. So this is a great example of how we can really drive some significant improvements in cognition, in our students' ability to understand and have the capacity to deal not just with the basics, but with some of the more complex thinking processes that we want them to be able to master. So I'm just going to sum up really briefly on the next slide, just to reinforce the principles and the strategies that we talked about, that the brain is a pattern-seeking device, the vital importance of emotions, and the importance of distinguishing, the kinds of skills that are developed and that become part of long-term memory, depending on whether it's something that it is more declarative and requires elaborative rehearsal, or it's procedural and requires lots of repetition. So you've just gotten a crash course in neuroscience, and hopefully it was helpful, and that you'll find some things in here that you're able to use and apply in your classrooms and your schools. And I don't know, I just ask you to click one more time, because what we want to remember is that it's all about that little student in the middle of all of these things and their ability of their brains to build their neural networks as the basis for really everything they do in school and in life. So we'll stop there, and we'd be happy to entertain any questions.
All right, well, thank you so much, Betsy. For those of you that joined us today, I think you learned a lot about the brain and how it works. Betsy, can you tell the group how we can get a hold of you should they have follow-up questions, or if maybe they want to learn more about Brainwave Safari?
Sure, be very happy to. There actually was, I think, one more slide, I thought, that had our email addresses on it.
Okay. Well, I don't have that information in front of me right now, but it will be on the slide.
Okay, and I will. It's my email address is bhill, BHILL, at learningenhancement.com. Actually, I think I can do this. I'm really smart about this. Organizers panels. No, can I send?
Yeah, actually, I can switch to you, and you can show them what you want to see.
Okay, I just was going to type it into the
chat box. The chat box. Okay, yeah, let's do that.
But I would see, maybe it's everybody.
If anyone would like to have any of those policy papers, we're more than delighted to share those with you as well.
Oh, good. Okay. Actually, if you want to, there we go. You sent it to me, but I can send it to everybody.
It would be good, because I don't see the option to send it to everybody.
Oh, it's underneath the comment box, or the box.
Yeah, but it's not. I'm not seeing that as a choice.
Oh, okay. Okay, I just sent it to everybody.
Okay, great. And here I'm going to give you also my phone number.
Okay.
And as Roger, I think, said, I'm not sure that it was very clear, copies of the OECD report, the NCATE report, lots of information about cognitive skills or Brainwave Safari, any of those kinds of things. We're more than happy to to provide. So don't hesitate to contact me, and we look forward to engaging in more discussions. This is a very exciting time. The information on the brain. I just got back actually from a session out in California with Dr. Pat Wolf, who wrote a book called Brain Matters, and we learned a lot about the latest research on the impact of technology on our students' brains, some of the issues of media and violence. It was just an absolutely fascinating, and so we're going to be sharing that information coming up as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, again, Roger, would you like to say any closing remarks before we end?
I just think if we do not begin to move quickly, we're just going to waste another generation. And I just think that the challenges that we're facing today in education is to create a lightning bolt under each of us to reach out and do the best we can to help our children. And unfortunately, so many things are about the what and not the how. And this is really about the how.
Right. Well, thank you both. I really appreciate your time and your expertise on this. And we will close. And again, this session has been recorded, so we will hopefully have it available on our website within 72 hours. Thanks again. I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Honor. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.